Have you ever wondered how artists capture the movement and power of breaking waves in their paintings? Painting a wave can be a challenging task for anybody, and just not getting it right can be downright frustrating. In this video, we will draw a basic wave, delve into the shapes of a wave breaking, and take a closer look at the way that light interacts with water. We will also discuss how to mix 7 basic colors and how to apply them, how to detail your wave painting, and some general tips and tricks for painting waves in the ocean. So let's jump into it. When I was grade 1, that would be 5 or 6 years old, we started learning letters at school. We started with cursive writing. I remember our teacher telling us a story about all the letters of the alphabet. Every week or so, we would add another letter into the story. There were apples and ladders, and snakes and donkeys, and of course there was the letter C, which represented the ocean, or the sea. Now the teacher actually had a point there. The cursive letter C is actually very close to what a wave looks like when it is breaking, when you cut out a segment from it and lie it flat and look at that. But the problem is that is 2-dimensional, and we need to capture 3 dimensions on our canvas. So let me show you how to draw that. Okay, so we have the cursive C shape that is like this, right? And this is the wave when you cut out a segment of it. In the middle here, there is a circle. So we'll be using this circular shape to draw the rest of the wave. To me, this is the key to painting the wave in any perspective. Let me explain. So this will be our canvas. Let's say we want the wave to be kind of around there. So I'm imagining a scene in my mind, but I don't really know how to draw the wave in. What we'll do is we'll draw that circle in perspective here. So in perspective, it will look a little bit more like an oval. Then we need to find a vanishing point. Usually for landscapes, our vanishing point is quite far off of the canvas. So I'm just going to narrow this cylinder down a little bit, but not a lot. And then we need to keep the perspective here. So this is our cylinder. Let's add in our horizon somewhere there. And then we know what this wave is supposed to do. So instead of drawing the C shape here, we're just drawing the cylinder here. So basically what we drew with this cylinder is what is not there. We drew the air. We have a cylinder, but now what? This step is pretty simple, but before we do it, I just want you to watch this clip of a wave breaking so that we can quickly talk about the different phases of a breaking wave. There are 4 stages of a wave breaking. Now, I'm just going to use my own terminology here. I'm not using some fancy words, it's just all my own observations. The wave will first swell, then it will start cresting, and then it breaks. This creates those beautiful curved images that we are so fond of. After that, the remaining swell keeps chasing the foam of the broken wave. The thing is, if you have a long wave, different stages can be present in different areas while the wave is breaking. So as we're drawing the wave breaking around the cylinder that we drew, we need to include various stages of the wave along the cylinder. So back to the cylinder, we can even extend it a little bit. You see, the perspective on this is not right. The vanishing point should be something like this. Okay, now that we have the horizon in, let me just fix this vanishing point, because that is not correct. Okay, so just basic perspective quickly. We can have a wave that is above the horizon if the angle of our camera is different. And the vanishing point will always go towards the horizon. It won't go over the horizon as I had it. So hopefully that makes sense. There are some great videos on perspective on YouTube if you want to learn more about it. I personally don't have a video about it yet. So we have our cylinder shape like this. And then I think we're going to add a smaller wave in here, but for now I'm just going to draw these 2 lines. We'll remember about that later. So let's have the actual nice breaking here. So we follow the curve of the cylinder that we drew, and then we just let the wave break over it. So some of the water will be partly broken, some of it will fully be there. This is what creates these shapes, and we can even have a small bit that only curved around a little bit. And let's make it about this size. Needs to curve around the cylinder, and we can draw lines in here to remind us of that. So this is what the wave is doing. Where it touches this water, there will be foam. We'll paint this in nicely later. Here we can just have the wave cresting and then tapering down. So when it's cresting, there's a little bit of foam at the top, and then here we can have it taper down as well. So now we drew the part that goes over the cylinder, but remember I said that the cylinder is basically air. We can see through the cylinder. Now we need to draw the part that is underneath the cylinder. So let's follow the curve of this wave and bring it down and out. This is the shape that your waves will have throughout. When we add color, we'll be using these lines. Let's include the other phase that I spoke about in this bottom wave. The swell that is chasing the broken wave or foam. So there will be a lot of foam here. And then we only have a small amount of water visible. As soon as the water comes out of the curve, it should flatten out. So that's the basics of drawing it. Now we can apply this in any perspective. So I want to show you if we do one that is kind of looking up at the wave, which means our horizon will be lower. So let's say we are in the water and the wave is breaking right next to us. So we have our cylinder, our horizon would be a little bit lower because we're looking up at the wave. Now this cylinder, because the circle is above and below the horizon line, this one will go towards the horizon and this one will also go towards the horizon. So this is basically what we're working with. So we can draw in another circle just to help us get an idea of what the cylinder looks like. So now we need to think really 3D on this, but let's draw in the crashing part first. So it's curving around the cylinder, and then we need to follow these lines around to draw in the rest. It's coming out here. And then we have some foam here. We can erase our construction lines to make the picture a little bit more clear. And we can draw in some more lines to help us. And that's the basics of the wave construction. It really is as easy as that. Now that we have a basic composition drawn out, we need to start adding color. But we can't add color without understanding light first. Waves reflect light in a very similar way that other substances do, such as a mirror or a bowl of water or a cup of coffee. When light strikes the surface of water, it reflects it at an angle back to the viewer. The angle at which the light is reflected depends on the angle of the observer and the angle of the light that's coming onto the water. It will also depend on your surroundings, which colors are reflected, but with waves we often see the color of the sky being reflected back to us. At a certain angle, the water will absorb the light more than it reflects it back at you. I'm just going to call this the area of absorption. It's my own terminology again. When I move the camera to this angle, you can see that we are looking more into the cup of coffee. Yes, there are still some reflection, but it's very faint, and the color of the coffee is the dominant color that we have. It's almost like a window into the coffee, or when you're looking at a wave, a window into the deep sea below. When we look at a wave, we will most likely see a combination of reflection and absorption. This is because there's a lot of different angles at play and there's a lot of distortion going on. Okay, let me show you these concepts on an actual photograph of a wave. And let's see if we can find the different reflection and absorption areas in the wave. So, we're going to start off with this picture. I think the most obvious area of reflection is the white foam that is reflecting in the wave itself. So this would be this area reflecting over there. And the same with this foam area, it's reflecting down. And here as well, you can see that it kind of follows the same pattern. So we have this curve that repeats itself down here. Let's see if we can find something else that can reflect. We have a sky color here that's bluish. And the sky reflects, as you can see, it's a very similar color in these light areas of the wave down here. So the sky reflects on the foreground, on the water in the foreground. And then sometimes the wave can reflect on itself a little bit, and I don't see much of it in this picture. Now the absorption areas, let's make these areas white, is where we can see into the ocean below. I think the best area to see this in is these dark areas in the foreground, because we're looking into the deep sea here. The same for this area and every dark area that's around here. There's quite a few. Another area where we can see into the ocean below is also this darker area over here. So in this area, we're definitely looking into it. I think those are the most prominent, but now we still have a lot of the picture left that we don't know if it's actually reflection or if it's absorption. There's one more phenomenon that we see. You might have heard the term subsurface scattering before. That is when light enters water and the water molecules bounce it around inside. We are still looking into the water, but it looks to be glowing from the inside out, and it's not the color of the deep water. And that's what we see with these greener areas, especially when the wave gets high, is that light enters from outside and lightens this area up. So it's still kind of absorption because we're looking into the wave, but the light from the surroundings are influencing it. Let's go over to a different picture. In this one you can see it really well. This area is super light and much greener than the sky would be. But with really clean, clear water, it will be a very similar color to the sky. And you can see down here, we're more looking into the wave again because we can see some of the sand from the bottom of the ocean. We also have some foam reflections there. We also have a shadow being cast by the wave itself. This picture I wanted to show to you because the clouds reflecting is really prominent. So here in the foreground, you can see the pinkish color from the sky reflecting. This image is just to illustrate again that it gets lighter at the top, the wave, because of the light entering it from the surroundings. Here are some nice sky reflections, and here we're looking into the deep dark of the ocean. I think that's fairly straightforward. So now that we know how light works, I just want to show you the basic colors that we're going to have to mix after this to actually paint the wave. First, obviously, we have our sky color. I think this is fairly self-explanatory. And then right here we get the sky reflected. And you can see now when I'm sampling these colors from the actual image, you can see that it's a little bit darker, a little bit less saturated. So just remember that when you're painting the sky. So that's the first group of colors. Then we have our foam colors. I think that's fairly straightforward. Like with any 3D object, we have a highlight color and a foam shadow color. Okay, so we have 4 already. I think I said in my intro 7 colors, but I think we're actually going to mix 8. Now we need the color that we find when we look into the ocean, and that's this dark blue that we see peeking out here and there. So it will look something like this. Sometimes a little bit more green, sometimes a little bit more dark blue. I'm going to call it deep water. Where the water gets a little bit more shallow, you'll see a bit of sand color mixed in, and that's what this is. It's not always visible, we're not always going to be mixing this color, but it's this desaturated grayish color that we see here. Sometimes it's a little bit more yellow because some sandy areas are more yellow than others, some are more brown looking. I'm going to put an asterisk here because we're not always going to mix this color. Then back to the foam. One thing that I forgot about the foam is we also have the reflections of the foam on the water, and you can see it really well there, and there's some reflections there. You can see it is, again, it's the similar color to the foam, but it's less saturated and a little bit darker. And then we are missing the tips of the waves, the greenish color that we get when the light enters the wave and then bounces around inside it, and then we see that lighter color. So let's go ahead and add that. Something that I do want to mention, and you can't see it that well in this picture, is that oftentimes the actual foam from the waves crashing and from previous waves crashing makes the water around the wave appear lighter than it actually is. Well, it actually is light because there's a lot of foam bubbles in there. It just appears a lightish blue, almost the same color as the foam. So if you see that in a picture, you can just identify it and know what it is. What do we call this? I'm going to call it light water just because I don't know what else to call it. Okay, so here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 colors. Yeah, 8 colors that we're going to be mixing now. And I'm just going to show you how to mix everything and then where to paint it in the wave painting that you planned out. Let's go do that. I'm using 4 basic colors to mix everything else: white, blue, yellow and red. First off, we need to mix the sky color. I just mix white and blue for that. To paint the sky reflection, I darken the sky color with blue, and then to desaturate it, I add a small amount of red and yellow. The foam highlight should be a little bit more grayish, so I mix up some red, yellow and blue with white. Then, to mix the foam shadow, I create a darker version of this grey with less white. The foam reflection color is also very similar to this, but with a little bit more blue. On camera it looks more yellow, but I did adjust it when blocking the colors in. The light water is very simple, with yellow and blue to mix a green, and then adding white to lighten it. For the deep water, I mix some red, blue and a tiny smidge of yellow for a deep blue, almost a little bit of a purple color. I just want to show you how to mix the sandy color for shallow water, but we're not going to use it. I take a little bit of yellow, some red and add white. I also add a smidge of blue to tone down the saturation a little bit. Now we need to block these colors in. I first start off by covering the entire sky with the sky color. After that, I add some sky reflections to the bottom of the scene. I use short horizontal strokes for this. I then add some reflections going up the slope of the wave. Then it's time for some basic foam highlights. I just try to think where the foam would catch the light and use rough strokes to block it in. After adding the foam highlights everywhere that the wave breaks, I add a shadowy color to the areas that I think won't catch direct light. I want the light to come from the right of the image. I also add some foam reflections on the water below the wave and on the curve of the wave. It creates a starting point to work off of. Then I move on to the area of the wave that will have some subsurface scattering. This will be the highest point of your waves. After that, it's time for the deep water color. I add this in between the highlights that I've painted in. I also add it to the bottom part of the wave curve. You can see how the wave already starts to take shape with all of these basic colors in place. Now comes the massive task of working and reworking it until it looks just right. This involves mixing a lot of blue tones between the ones that we've already gotten down. We blocked in the more extreme ones, and now we need to add everything in between and blend them together. This turquoise is to add a base color to the wave. I think here I got the curve of the wave wrong, and that's a mistake that I still need to fix on this painting, and this is where it started. I also added this color to connect the deep water and the light top area of the wave. I mix a lighter blue to connect the foam area with the top part of the wave. I make my brush strokes follow the curve of the wave. Now there's a lot of painting and repainting. I want to define the deep water at the bottom a bit more, so I rework that area quite a bit. I also work a slightly lighter blue in there to soften the harsh edges. I want the foreground to be more blurry so that the focus of the image will be on the crashing wave. I also work some of this color onto the rest of the wave to create continuity between the foreground and the wave. The blue that I'm working with is very translucent, so I need to apply a few different layers to get the opacity that I really want. On the second layer of the sky, I want to make sure that the sky has a gradient from darker at the top to lighter at the bottom. I create this effect by adding the darkest color at the top and then the lightest color at the bottom. I then gradually add more and more blue to my lightest color to bring the gradient up to meet the top. This massive bunch of foam is a little distracting and too much for this wave, so I decide to remove it by painting over it with a darker color. Once the dark has dried, I can paint over it with other colors to make it look more natural. I also want to blend out the harsher lines on the wave itself, so I mix and apply a light blue that's in between the two hues that's already there. Now I'm making a big fat mess by chopping off part of the wave with a green that is too light, but I will fix it later. I'm making another mistake by removing a portion of the wave that should actually curl into the foam that's already present. As of publishing this video, I don't consider the painting done yet, but I am leaving it to rest a little bit so that I can look at it with fresh eyes later. I'm also lightening the top of the wave way too much with the light green. I also make the rest of the wave appear a little bit more green, which I think looks fine. The closer the water is to breaking, the lighter it appears. That's why I'm using a light blue close to the foam. As you can see, my mistaken adjustments to the wave so far has made the wave look flat and a little bit lopsided. I decided that the green is too green, so I'm lightening it with a more bluish color now. I also want to separate the wave at the back from the main one, so I'm adding some dents in the sky to break up that one continuous line to separate the objects. At this point, I'm just fiddling with colors and lines to try to get it to look good and to blend different colors with one another. After fiddling and fiddling and fiddling and fiddling and making a mess of my composition and lighting, I finally realized that my lighting was completely off and most of the underside of the wave actually needs to be in shadow because my light source is coming from the right. I also added some spray with a light blue, just trying to blend it into the surrounding colors, and I added the foam by gently dabbing the color on to create the spray-like effect. I'm probably going to do some of this over when I have a chance to look at the painting again, but for now I think you got the idea on how I paint waves, and I'm pretty sure you'll be able to do a fantastic job.